Game devs accuse publisher of exploiting their identity for diversity funding, then never seeing a dime. Coffee Talk team was forced to delay new slice of life game, A Space for the Unbound, after cutting ties with the UK-based publisher. But in the indie sphere, because of publishing, people have to deal with that same issue that you would have to deal with for a larger publisher, but it's more, I guess your abuse is more streamlined because it's directly at you and it's not spread across a whole like department. It's you specifically. And to get abused in this way and used in this way is not something I've heard of before, but I'm super happy that people were willing in that company were willing to do, because it puts a spotlight on this abuse and is like, hey, maybe don't use this publisher if you get an offer. Not to mention letting people know that this is why the game isn't coming out yet, even if it wasn't going to come out right now if this hadn't happened. Though at the same time, I could technically say it would be more likely to be out right now if this hadn't happened, because that money could be used to support the development team, which would make development go smoother. Fuck. Dear space divers, we are sad to announce that we will be delaying the release of A Space for the Unbound until further notice. Earlier this year, we discovered that P-Cube Games, a UK-based publisher that we had signed for the console publishing of A Space for the Unbound for Western regions, had done several things which left us feeling manipulated and exploited, and so we have had to terminate our agreement with them. At the height of COVID-19 pandemic, in August 2020, P-Cube Games used our position and heritage as developers from Indonesia to obtain a diversity fund from a well-known console program. The Diversity Fund was a grant fund intended to help underrepresented game developers, especially during the pandemic. However, instead of giving these funds to the developers as a grant was intended, P-Cube Games intentionally withheld information about the grant and used it as leverage for their own commercial gain, rather than paying the grant money to us. P-Cube Games hid the facts about the grants award and added it as a recoupable minimum guarantee, and then used it to negotiate the increase of their revenue share. We have only uncovered the true amount of these funds and their intended purposes in March 2022. We're obviously heartbroken to a party we worked with would do this. We're absolutely heartbroken that a party we worked with would do this, and a project we worked for 7 years? A project we worked on for 7 years has been taken advantage of in such a way. Since the uncovering of this issue, we clearly cannot trust P-Cube Games nor continue to work together for the release of A Space for the Unbound, as P-Cube Games has fallen considerably short not only of reasonable decency, but also of their obligations to us due to these predatory practices. We have to make a stand against exploitable publishers and speak up about this to stop things like this from happening again in the future. Thus, we're also announcing that we have terminated our contract with P-Cube Games. As of this moment, P-Cube Games is still refusing to hand over publishing control on console platforms back to us. It is with a heavy heart that we must hold back on the release of Space for the Unbound until we can make new arrangements, so that we can make new arrangements and ensure that it is published as intended and in a way that is consistent with our and our community values. We of Toge Productions and Mojiken Studio do not encourage nor wish for people to do negative or harmful actions such as review bombing, boycotting, or others on such games published by P-Cube Games. Doing so will affect the developers who created the game and have nothing to do with our situation with the Space for the Unbound. All we ask is for people to read our statement and for your understanding of our delay. I wanted to talk about this. And I guess make a short video about it, which I guess technically I'm doing now and just recording on stream because it's easier for me to do things on stream, essentially. There's also a Kotaku article on this that I'll read in a second, but I think that it's really easy to assume that a indie developer is always being treated fairly, or because they're not working for a AAA company, that they're not being exploited or coerced in some way. And there is like kind of silent coercion that happens in many industries, not just the video game industry, when it comes to how do I put this? When it comes to like working between projects, very much like some studios will take people out of the credits for games that they worked on once they leave the company. If they leave the company before the game releases, there are many things that can make it so that a publisher has some sort of ability to silence the people who work for them, just like these major companies disincentivize people who work for them to talk about the negative experiences that they have. Um, it's even something we see in the animation industry, that if you call out like shitty practices, there's a chance that you'll get blacklisted from many companies, because they stick together and they obviously have a shared interest in continuing to exploit labor from passionate artists, because it's a easy it's an easy way to recycle cheap labor. You burn out a whole team, you fire them, or fire any ones that can't keep up with the demanding workload, and call them unpassionate or not as driven. And then you just hire the next batch of fresh out of college artists. It happens a lot. In the indie sphere, a lot of people value just the fact that a game is published by an indie developer, because there's the assumption that it's made more ethically. It's like, oh yeah, this milk was made by cows that got to actually graze and weren't in like pens their whole life, you know? It's kind of just to assuage our own guilt. And I say that as an overall in an overall industry sense, not in a my system sense. Though I guess it could apply to us as well. Generally, it assuages our guilt about how capitalism exploits people, if you can be like, well, the games I play are made by people who don't get exploited. They get to do the work they want, and look, they make amazing games. I didn't even know that the team behind A Space for the Unbound was the same team that was behind Coffee Talk. Coffee Talk is a game I've owned, but I have not played on stream, but I do love and do want to play on stream at some point. There's a lot of games like that where it's like, yeah, it's just sitting in my library and I'll play it eventually. But A Space for the Unbound is a game that I've been waiting to play on stream since I found out about it in 2020. So for at least 2 years that it's been developed, I have been waiting for it. We did stream the demo once, and it left such a profound effect on us. I think it even ended up in one of our stream intros. Like, it was that impactful, especially because it was about art and stuff. And more recently, it was even included in a Crinkle Bump, because part of the story is about a young artist who is being abused by her dad. It's very... It has a lot of interesting themes, and we are unfamiliar with the culture of Indonesia and how Indonesia was. And I think the game takes place in like definitely before the 2000s. I want to say like the 70s or something, maybe even before that. And it's interesting to see a period piece in this way, because I'm more likely to see a story like this in animation than I am in a video game, because video games don't tend to be period pieces unless they're long ago period pieces, like say Fire Emblem, and like, you know, something like medieval or feudal. So this is a slice of a experience that people just have, and people have nostalgia for, that I wouldn't even really know about without a game like this, or some sort of story that takes place in such an environment would reflect. I feel really gracious. I feel really lucky that I exist in a time where more and more people can create stories, especially games, which is like my favorite medium of art, can make games where people get to reflect their own experiences and in a way teach. Not necessarily I'm not playing this game necessarily to learn more about Indonesian culture, but I don't approach it from a colorblind perspective either. When I just first was looking through Steam looking for games to play on stream, it came up. I don't know if it was on the front page or I was just looking for cool story-rich indie games, but without knowing much about it at all, I was really captivated by the art style, and it was uncanny in a way culturally because there were certain things that I recognized because it's like kids playing pretend and using their imagination, having like a secret hideout, and it seemed very much like a lot of coming of age stories that I've experienced for that I even have nostalgia for, even though it doesn't reflect my actual lived experience. Like, I never lived in the suburbs before this year. And I don't have experience like riding my bike with a bunch of kids my age and like having like a secret tree house in a forest nearby or something. But I've ingested so much media about it that I have a simulacrum of nostalgia for it. Uh, and I think that the way that we can have nostalgia for media or nostalgia for experiences that we only learned about through media is like a really powerful tool for understanding different experiences. And it's especially why I like to play and show off, say, queer games, even if I think that my audience, by and large, already has brushed up against a lot of those experiences, because I do want people who haven't had those experiences or aren't as familiar with those experiences to be able to see them and experience them in a more accessible way, for example. Part of the reason why I like to read and voice act for games that generally don't have a voice acting budget, and or aren't looking to find voice actors or whatever, slash wouldn't hire voice actors even if they had the budget, because it's not in the scope of the kind of way they want to tell the story. But I like to be able to present to people a way to experience these stories that they might not get otherwise. So from a completely like story driven and my love of art perspective, I have been very low-key obsessed with this game for a while. And games like this and other games that I've been waiting for a long time, they're now getting closer and closer to coming out, some even this year, have really made me aware of the industry practices that affect this art that I love. That before I was an artist in the public sphere myself, I didn't appreciate the nuances of experiences that people had and how hard it is to get a game published. A lot of people say, just self-publish, and sometimes I'm like that too. But to get a publisher on board makes a lot of things easier, and distribution is very, very important. And as we've said in some video long ago, I'm sure, publishers are kind of like landlords. They provide a service that shouldn't necessarily need to be done. Someone could say, "Oh, no one's putting a gun to your head to like live in like a certain place." To like have to talk to a landlord and have to deal with the stress of like getting on a lease and stuff like that. It's like, I can't just like walk in a random direction, find a place in the woods and like build a house there. Like, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. Not least of which is like needing to own land to build on it, right? And in the same way that, say, I have to upload this to YouTube for anyone to see it in any great capacity. Just the opportunity, not necessarily a lot of people will see this, but I need to upload to like the most visible website for video content if I want any chance of people seeing it en masse. For a video game publisher, they have a monopoly on distribution. And so it's not enough for you to be good enough, quote unquote, to become the next Undertale. And even though you're an indie game, get like this cultural recognition to the point where there's like plushies of your characters and you're financially stable based on your art. If you can't get it into the hands and eyes of people who would want to play it, no matter how good your shit is, it won't get seen. It can be a stressful situation. And as someone who really wants to make video games as well as talk about them and play them a lot, it's something that I pay extra special attention to, not just from the perspective of someone who cares about how developers are treated, especially in the realm of development that I care about most. I care way more about indie development than AAA development because it allows people to take risks and do things in a game that AAA publishers either wouldn't allow or would sand down. For example, Sonic Forces gets a lot of hate, but Sonic Forces wouldn't even exist the way it does if not for Sega being like, "Hey, no, we need more Sonic in this. People aren't gonna buy this if there's not enough if there's no Sonic in it." So then they had to redo the story basically, and like a lot of things that people shit on it for aren't the fault of the developers at all. And of course, because of Sonic being the media property it is, there's no way for you to make a mainline Sonic game without that issue because of the intellectual property. But there are plenty of indie fan Sonic games that are amazing in their own right, that don't have that pressure to perform in a certain way or do what shareholders are gonna want and shit like that. But in the indie sphere, because of publishing, people have to deal with that same issue that you would have to deal with for a larger publisher, but it's more, I guess your abuse is more streamlined because it's directly at you and it's not spread across a whole like department. It's you specifically. And to get abused in this way and used in this way is not something I've heard of before, but I'm super happy that people were willing in that company were willing to do, because it puts a spotlight on this abuse and is like, hey, maybe don't use this publisher if you get an offer. Not to mention letting people know that this is why the game isn't coming out yet, even if it wasn't going to come out right now if this hadn't happened. Though at the same time, I could technically say it would be more likely to be out right now if this hadn't happened, because that money could be used to support the development team, which would make development go smoother. Fuck. I'm gonna respond to comments now. I'm not sorry. Thank you for being patient and waiting for me to acknowledge your presence. I am redeeming so many head pats purely to judge how palatable each fluff is. Thank you. Oh no, not this game. Oh, I'm assuming you heard about this. You heard about the story already. At this point, I always assume indies, especially studios and Drizzle publishers, just have it fucking awful because capitalism. That's a good assumption, to be honest. Hey, Zach. Hi, Drizzle. How's it going? I won't be in chat for a bit, but I will be listening. Thank you, Noel. Appreciate it. And I appreciate all my regulars being here, whether you're lurking or not. Even if you haven't spoken in chat, I appreciate you greatly. Hello, Sonny. I hope you're feeling better today than you were last night. Thank you for giving us your full thoughts uninterrupted. You're welcome. It's nice to think out loud sometimes. Also, good morning, Specky. Rar. Okay, so at first I thought that they were just going to be parroting the stuff from the tweet I just shared, but luckily, Kotaku actually had something else to say. And it also makes me think, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't just read out what they said and comment on it, just publishers can be bad. This is really messed up. But it's also kind of the thing that a lot of racists uncritically say about art with diversity. It's like, oh, you're just using diversity to make a profit, which is ironically what a lot of people who are not shitty racists or homophobes or whatever will say, where it's like, oh yes, rainbow capitalism, you know, the pivoting of marginalized identities to gain favor with those communities so they buy your game. Or shit, buy your vodka. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but Smirnoff, for example, has a gay vodka label that they only roll out during Pride Month. No other time. And it's kind of disgusting to know that it's only being used from that perspective. I like to be acknowledged for my thingies, but I hate to be used as a tool, you know, just for more profits. And I mean, it is part of this capitalist hellscape that we're in. So it's not any one company's fault. And from an economic sense, it's weird to say, but like morality doesn't go into a lot of those business decisions regardless. And so it's like, well, it only makes sense to do this. It's just like how there's like the Christmas Coca-Cola that goes out during the wintertime. They basically see it like that. It's like, oh, this is the seasonal thing that we must do. Cool fan bases. Uh, so to see in the gaming world a team being exploited because they're Indonesian is really, it shouldn't be eye-opening to me in any way, shape, or form. Like, I shouldn't be surprised. But I guess it's the first time I've ever heard of something like this happening. So it does kind of rub me raw a little bit. Especially because considering that Asian people are considered by many to be like the most agreeable or the most positive minority in certain ways. Like there's a lot of racism that is garnered towards any Asian people, especially East Asian people, about being like super intelligent and hardworking and all this other shit, which is really coercive in a way, even outside of the pressure that someone who is Asian might put on themselves to perform, say, for their family. Like, I know people who literally had helicopter parents, parents who considered them to be not smart at all unless they got straight A's, for example. I've known people from many racial backgrounds that were honor students that if they got a fucking B, they would get depressed. And I remember at the time that there were people who would make fun of them for it, not realizing the wider implications of how a person can be like that. And of course, in the video game sphere, especially with the proliferation of anime and anime style and art, there is a fetishization of especially East Asian culture that just generally hurts people. Unfortunately, it was surprising to me that the fund that was used to benefit the publisher and not the actual developers even existed. And I think that there's a lot of people who may equally be surprised just from the fact that like mutual aid funds and stuff exist, but we hardly hear about certain things unless there's drama behind them, or unless it's in the public eye right now. Like, I haven't heard about bail funds for people who are getting arrested protesting. I haven't heard about that since last year, for example. And I'd love to find out how I can better support game devs other than the simple fact of buying their games. And I think that this is a great opportunity, not just in boosting this news, but also I want to look and see the company or the charity that was giving out this money is called, so that I can boost them and other companies like them, other charities like them as well. I guess a charity still is a company. as far as I know, the charity didn't do anything wrong. As far as they knew, they were getting the developers were going to get the money. And I kind of relate in a sense. When we used to live in Chicago, we had to at one point apply to a charity to help pay our rent. And they did help pay our rent, but it wasn't a direct line to us, and it felt really weird because they were giving money straight to the landlord, but the landlord could easily lie about the money and still charge people. And it was a bit clusterfuck with communication because basically they were doing this but going over our head about it. And because we had to talk to our landlord and the people we were paying rent to that we were subleasing from, it was hard to know if the money was given, if we still had to pay rent that month. Like, there was a lot of stress, and we're the ones who incited that would happen. We're the ones that were like, hey, we need help. Can this charity, can you help us? Whereas with this thing, it was more like, oh, we're publishing a game from this developer that has Indonesian development team. They fall within the lines for this charity. This could help them, but I'm so glad it can help us. And it's just like, ugh. It's like, it was like my worst fears about my own situation, but on a grander scale, you know? Not yet. Don't know when we'll be able to heal. Fuck. I know that feeling. I hope you can just do your best to be resilient for now then. I believe in you. Yeah, I also made fun of some girls who cried after getting a C or a B. It's horrifying to think about how awful their background had to be. I wish I could apologize to them. Mood. I feel like I more internally mocked people than like to their face, but I still feel bad for holding those beliefs. And I think a lot of it came from jealousy on my end of being like, oh, well, this person's doing so well. And it's really easy to internalize those behaviors. Game devs accuse publisher of exploiting their identity for diversity funding, then never seeing a dime. Coffee Talk team was forced to delay new slice of life game, A Space For The Unbound, after cutting ties with the UK-based publisher. It's funny they're using this picture, just as an aside, because I would not think of the game as a slice of life game, and I think on Steam the game literally does have slice of life as one of its genres. But then again, technically Persona is slice of life as well. It's just other things too. It does have like a really big supernatural element to it, and I think that like imagination and I guess kind of terror is also what drew us to the game. Not to mention the themes of abuse. And I don't usually think of slice of life as having like such hard themes, but I think I want it to be more normalized for slice of life to be able to be serious. Because the slice of many folks' lives has not been, ooh, I went to school and we are in this club and we got to eat pizza, and the only problems we had were getting good grades and maybe getting the people we like to like us back. Like, there's so much more to a life than just the feel-good parts, you know? Just ordinary life in Indonesia, huh? On August 24th, the Indonesian developers at indie game studios Toge Productions and Mojikin Studio announced that their new point-and-click adventure game, A Space For The Unbound, is indefinitely delayed following their contract termination with publisher P-Cube Games. The developers were moved to terminate their contract with the London-based the Galgun publisher? Okay. I was like, do I know P-Cube Games? I do. Their contract with the London-based Galgun publisher, which would have handled console publishing in Western regions, after feeling manipulated and exploited as use of an unnamed diversity fund. Ah, it's an unnamed diversity fund, that is true. I do want to look, though, and see what kind of diversity funds existed at the time. Because it might not exist at the time because, of course, it was something specifically for COVID. At the height of COVID-19 pandemic in August 2020, PCube Games used our position and heritage as developers from Indonesia to obtain a diversity fund from a well-known console platform. The developers write in a PR email that was also posted in full on Twitter. However, instead of giving those funds to the developers as the grant was intended, PCube Games intentionally withheld information about the grant and used it as leverage for their own commercial gain. Rather than paying the grant money to us, the developers continued, PCube Games hid the facts about the grant's award and added it as a recoupable minimum guarantee, and then used it to negotiate the increase of their revenue share. Kotaku reached out to Toge Productions and Mojiken Studio for comment. In their PR joint statement, the developers say that PCube Games is refusing to grant them control over their console publishing again. And so a Space for the Unbound's delay comes from the team's desire to make new arrangements and ensure that it is published as intended and in a way that is consistent with our and our community's values. According to PCube, whose PR team responded to my request for comment over email, the publisher has honored all obligations of our publishing agreement and have supported Toge Productions at every stage of product development throughout their delays and difficulties. This support has included offering significant further funding over and above grant funding to support development, porting, and marketing. Toge Productions have sought for some time to unilaterally used to indicate that something is done by only one person, group, or country involved in a situation without the agreement of others. Toge Productions have sought for some time to unilaterally enforce unreasonable revised terms to our agreement, and it is disappointing that as a result of not achieving that, and despite PCube's significant efforts to accommodate this, they have sought to deal with the matter in this way. We will respond through the appropriate channels. PCube did not clarify the status of the diversity funds or elaborate on Toge Productions on reasonable revised terms in time for publication. The developers asked if frustrated would be a Space for the Unbound players not boycott or review bomb PCube, as doing so will affect the publishers who created the game and have nothing to do with their situation with a Space for the Unbound. The warning didn't seem to have any precipitated by anything. Major PCube titles seem to have their Steam and Google reviews intact at least. Despite its delay, A Space for the Unbound has a downloadable demo up now on Steam. The game, which tells the story of overcoming anxiety, depression, and the relationship between a boy and a girl with supernatural powers, says in its Steam description, is also featured in booths in person and online as part of Gamescom 2022 Indie Games Exhibition. Yeah, it's like it been back in the like indie media news cycle because of Gamescom 2022. So this was actually a really big moment. I think as a enjoyer of especially indie games and someone who, especially through the research of our Mori video that we still haven't finished, that we have to start over, we've become way more aware of the pressures, anxieties, and difficulties of indie game creation, especially if you want to make a profit. It is still hard to say make a game and release it self-publish on itch.io, for example, where it's just like, hey, here's a price point, or even what I see some developers doing, not feeling like their games deserve compensation, even though they sometimes literally work for years on them, making them free, but pay what you want. Even doing that is hard, but I think from the PR side, it can be very challenging. One video that we looked at in preparation for our Mori video talked about how developers for like AAA studios sometimes get, say, death threats and harassment because of a game being delayed. Not like canceled or anything, just delayed. And the amount of, or I should say, the lack of empathy that a lot of, I guess, capital G gamers TM have for the people who make the thing that they love is so upsetting, so incredibly upsetting. And I think as a creator myself, when I see people, say, apologizing on social media for their mental health slipping and them needing to cancel a stream, for example, or a video taking too long, it used to be that my first thought was, oh, like, you're just over apologizing. You don't need to do that. No, it's fine. But I also have to remember that I'm a lot more empathetic. Whereas a lot of people already have the experience as developers of being harassed, or of artists on the internet of being chewed out for being human, essentially. So I think it also took a lot of empathy and compassion to make sure to add that addendum of, hey, we want to call out this thing, but please don't do the gamer thing and review bomb. I think review bombing sucks. I don't see a lot of reason for review bombing. That's even going to come up in another video that Fanta's going to do at some point. Because one of her favorite games is a game that was made by people who are very transphobic. And there were a lot of people who were like, when it came out that the developers were transphobic, it was like, oh, this game gets a 0 now instead of a 10, because a lot of people were showering it with praise, but then they found out about the fucked up stuff, and they were like, well, that makes the game bad. And it's like, the game didn't change. You just got more information about the people who made it. And I guess in the same way, being like mad and upset about the news that a developer who makes art that you enjoy is getting used or manipulated is valid. Taking that out on other developers is not. And understanding that this thing that you think will help, it won't necessarily help. So I'm doing the one thing I can do to try to help. And I'm gonna play a Space for the Unbound now, so you can see how awesome it is. Also, for B-roll for the video. But it is a short game. Or a short demo. And it's been years since we played it, so that'll be nice. You thought I wasn't gonna play games this stream, I bet. Don't worry, I'm gonna play games this stream. I found a way. I thought you weren't going to stream this stream. 45 minutes in the stream and she gives you this look. You thought I wasn't gonna stream this stream? I mean, I could have easily recorded this, right? But I am, content is content, you know? Sometimes I do work better when other people are, like, watching us. And I find it easier to do this than, like, jump into Discord and be like, yeah, work or hang out with me while I work. Because it's less pressure in case no one comes, because I can only see if someone's here if they're interacting with me directly through chat, whereas on Discord, for example, that's not the case. And also don't have to worry about muting someone or like deafening and muting if I want to record something. It's like all here in the moment. Oh, you thought I wasn't gonna stream today? I mean, this isn't a stream day. I'm just doing what I can to maintain my stability. Are you filled with content now? I'm very, very filled with content. Yeah. Our normal stream day is actually Friday. So this is still not... This does not confirm or deny whether or not we're streaming tomorrow.